All right. So my name's Ian Kilpatrick. I work on the layout team on Blink. And today, a lot of things have been changing in layout over the past year or so. And so I thought I'd just give a broad update about how to think about layout code base. So where we were 18 months ago, and sort of where we will be in sort of the next 9 to 12 months type of thing. So feel free to like type a message in chat to ask a question or raise your hand. I'll probably try and answer questions in line. We don't have that many people today. That's an aside, let's get started. So we've sort of been on this long arc inside of layout and sort of updating our layout engine. As of about 18 months ago, about 70% of our layouts were on the what we call the NG system, the new architecture. So here, I've just got a smattering of different layouts. The NG ones are in blue and the legacy ones are in yellow. And broadly speaking, we sort of did the hardest thing first, which was converting block layout. And in doing that, block layout accounts for almost like 70% of the layouts on the web. So it's actually a huge thing to do first. And that was about 18 months ago or so. What we started doing as well is we started building this separate tree, which is known as a fragment tree, which is the update of the output of layout. And so we started to bolt this onto the side sort of thing. And so, it was, depending on your page, it was like more or less complete. But the way that it would work is like we'd have a fragment which sort of knew all of its geometry. And then as soon as we hit a legacy root, which is what we'd call it. So for example, over here, we've got a block with one child, which is a flexbox. And its corresponding fragment, it's got one child, which is this opaque rectangle. We can't sort of see inside of it. So we sort of had this disjointed fragment tree. Um, uh, So there's lots of benefits to the fragment tree. It's immutable. We can use it for caching and things like that. But we want to be at a state where we've got the whole entire tree on the fragment as a fragment tree. So this is where we were. Where we are today, that didn't sort of look like a huge update, but trust me, it is. We've roughly got, or we will in about a month's time, about 99% of the layouts onto the NG architecture. The only things that we're really falling back to is for things like multi-column and printing. So this is why we've still got the layout view on the old system still. So in terms of the fragment tree, instead of this relatively sparse fragment tree where we've sort of got these rectangles that we don't really understand and things like that, it's much more complete now. So much so that like the way that you should sort of think about the fragment tree post M93, which is when we'll flip likely grid on, is that we'll almost have a complete fragment tree except for when we hit anything related to fragmentation. So specifically like a multi-column, or if we like switch into printing mode, then the whole tree will fall back to legacy. Any questions so far? I'm sort of going a little bit quickly. No, fantastic. And sort of every incremental step that we've done, so we've converted, Flexbox, table, form controls and stuff like that. We've had a significant improvement in the performance and also the correctness of that particular layout type. So as an example, this is all of the table bugs that we're hopefully going to be able to close as of the M91 release, which is rolling out at the moment. And these are some really old and really, really highly starred bugs. So for the longest time, we didn't have subpixel support for layout. We can finally support position sticky on table rows, for example. We can get border collapsing correct with col span and row span cells, which has like 76 stars. The way that I think about stars in the layout component, at least, is that there are, we sort of have two classes of things. We have features, which often get really, really high star counts, and then we have bugs, which typically don't get as high star counts. So whenever you see, a bug with, 20, 15, 20 or so stars, that's, something that really, really should be a pretty high priority. And a lot of the table ones that we're fixing are sort of in that range of, this is a bug, super, super high star count for being a bug rather than a feature. So tables should be a huge, huge step forward for us in terms of correctness. The table component, I think, has about 140, 150 stars or so, issues. And we should be fixing about 80 of them in the M91 release. So it should be really, really great to see. As an aside as well, layout accounts for about roughly 10% of all started bugs inside of Blink generally. So it's actually, developers care a lot about, layout correctness, so to speak. Any questions on tables? This is all of the hard work of Alex. He's sort of been, slogging away for about a year and a half on this. So go ahead.
How have we been reasoning about interop? We're fixing a giant number of bugs. Are we worried that any of these fixes are going to break anyone's sites?
Yeah, so we're slightly worried, but we're sort of quietly confident. Tables, broadly speaking, have been all over the place for a long time. There really hasn't been high interop. And sort of Alex, I might give you a document later, which you can read through from Alex, but Alex has been basically going through, seeing what all the browsers do, comparing that to the spec. And often it's the case that, there's one question and then 4 different answers. And so we've sort of been going through and, where there is precedent in a few different areas, like we'll try and match that. So in some cases, we've matched Firefox. In some cases, we've matched like Edge HTML previously. In some cases, we've kept our behavior. We filed issues on the spec and written a whole bunch of tentative test cases. As of like 3 years ago or so, there was no table spec. It was just a exercise for the reader. But that said, Alex, reached out to people like SAP, and they ran it over their test suite. They have a UI framework called UI5, and they basically found no issues. So we're sort of quietly confident. Sort of a lot of people have been like, when they use tables, they typically code down to the lowest common denominator. So where we are changing our behavior, hopefully, there might be some, we found some regressions in beta, which this time around. But hopefully, we won't cause that much churn in M91. I expect we might get 1 or 2 issues. But we've sort of been running this on in sort of Canary Dev for the past, I guess it's been 2 or 3 months now. So we're quietly confident, but we don't know what we don't know until we roll out to stable, basically. Yeah, did that answer your question, Tim?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, Brian?
So I'll just ask, since you mentioned that currently we still fall back for things like print.
Mm-hmm.
Are there plans to make that not the case?
Yes, I will get to that later, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah. I was just trying to toss you an opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah. So we also, each step of the way, so tables was clearly like a huge win in terms of correctness. Flexbox was actually a huge win in terms of performance. The numbers that we really care about for layout performance are those high percentiles, so the 99th percentile. And we sort of substantially decreased that. The way to think about layout performance is that, like, on average, all layouts just didn't decrease by 11%. What we find is it's typically, we've taken like one layout that was, say 40 milliseconds and then made it like 10 milliseconds or something like that. It's very, very like, will affect one site, but one site in a very, very large way. And you can sort of, if you like dig into the histograms for these percentiles, you can sort of see that like we'll take out a huge, huge amount at like height, like really, really long tail layout times, and then it'll sort of push up in the lower layout times. So Flex was a really, really good story around performance. And we sort of expect this a similar thing. We likely won't see it in UMA data, but we likely will see it on individual sites where we've taken a layout from like, we know of cases with Grid where a layout will take 300 or 400 milliseconds and be able to make that 30 or 40 milliseconds. I can get to why that is at the very, very end if people are interested, those sort of performance increases. So broadly, this 99% this is sort of what we've been doing over the past 18 months or so. So Grid, which is what all of the Microsoft folks have been working on, I believe quite a few of them are in the chat at the moment. This is people like Kurt, Anna, Jacques, and Ethan have been sort of diligently working on Grid. That's going to be super exciting. That's going to be a huge performance and correctness improvement. We've talked about flex and tables. We've flipped all of the editing stuff on. Kent, who's based in Tokyo, did an absolute amazing job just converting all of the form controls one by one in the course of about 3 to 6 months, which was incredibly fast. And we've also taken all of the replace sizing calculations into NG. The only things the only things that are sort of on the legacy system now, once grid ships, hopefully in M93, is really just printing and multi-column. And the both things that these have in column are fragmentation. And we have all of the fragmentation bugs, basically. There's a couple of other small things, like we fall back to the old system for text combine, which is a very, very small inline feature. And there's another project that we're working on, which is basically making a text stack for SVG modern, so it supports complex shaping, which is a really, really big pain point for people that are using SVG. But broadly speaking, the way to think about layout now is that only fragmentation is on the old system. We have all of the layout bugs in terms of fragmentation. So this is all of our bugs in the layout component ordered by star count, and all of the highlighted ones are related to fragmentation. And this is somewhat surprising. You sort of don't think of fragmentation as a big feature. The problem with our fragmentation engine today is that when it breaks in a really, really big and noticeable way. And so a lot of people file bugs about specific cases, or they will file, or they'll find the bug which is causing it and star it. And a lot of layout modes that we had sort of shipped over the past 10 years, so specifically Grid and Flexbox, were never fragmentation aware. So they're sort of almost impossible to use inside of like a print context or a multi-column context. So this is why we sort of want to concentrate on fragmentation over the course of the next 6 to 9 months, and hopefully wipe out a whole bunch of these really, really high star bug counts. The other reason why sort of fragmentation is sort of highly starred is Chromium is used as a like one of the primary ways of like generating PDFs. So there's a very, very large community of people that sort of run Chromium in headless mode just for generating PDFs. It kind of makes sense. No HTML and CSS can generate PDF. And this is sort of a smattering. I talked about feature bugs versus like bug bugs. This is sort of a smattering of both. So there are some feature related bugs in here, but a lot of these down in the sort of 20 and 30s are like bug bugs. This is an example of how broken we are when it comes to fragmentation. So we'll sort of slice in the middle of text boxes, which is really, really bad and not at all what people want. And this is why the sort of the bugs in fragmentation are very, very noticeable. And the other thing I sort of want to say is like, this isn't sort of the fact that we did like a bad job of Flexbox and Grid previously. It's sort of more of the case of the old engine was never set up for success in terms of fragmentation. It just wasn't a first-class citizen. So I'll quickly dive into like how fragmentation works and why it's broken. So how fragmentation sort of works is that we actually lay out in one single column. So if this applies for both like multi-column and printing. Multi-column sort of is like printing plus plus, if you want to think of it that way. So you could imagine all of these like rectangles here, here, and here as like separate pages or different columns, for example. So what we'll do is we'll just basically lay out the page in one single column. And then sort of like if a line of text or something ended up on a fragmentation boundary, so like a page break or a column break, we'll sort of just like shift all of the text down a little bit. And so the unique thing about block layout is that you know your position ahead of time. So you can just do a single pass and fragment correctly. How this is painted is then we'd actually paint the same thing 3 times. So we just apply different clips. And this is sort of explains this behavior. If you sort of imagine this as like, we're just laying out in one single column. And then you can sort of see, oh, this is obviously just like a painting clip line type of thing. So this is where most of our bugs are with fragmentation. Sorry, got a little bit lost there. And so this is a very, very rough timeline of how we're thinking about fragmentation in particular. So at the moment, we're sort of working on multi-column fragmentation. This is what sort of Morten and Alison at Microsoft have been working on for quite a while. And Koji started to help out with visual overflow as well as Yoshi. But basically, we're sort of working on multi-column fragmentation. The nice thing is that we've been planning for this for quite a while. So we actually bolted on fragmentation relatively early in the project's lifetime. So we're sort of just at the point where we're just getting everything cleaned up and ready to ship. Basically, this is the most difficult part in here. And so the most difficult part in here is 2 things, which is out of flow fragmentation, as well as getting pre-paint correct. So pre-paint sort of needs to be taught about the fact that a layout object doesn't necessarily only have 1 rectangle associated with it now and has multiple, and how to traverse the fragment tree and everything like that. So that's sort of the most difficult step that Morten is working on at the moment. There's sort of 3 small projects, which will probably take roughly about a quarter each, is sort of adding proper fragmentation to flex grid and tables. That can mostly be done in parallel. And sort of once we finish with multi-column fragmentation, we'll start working on printing fragmentation, which should be relatively straightforward going forward. Kurt, did you have a question? Or you were just waving previously? I just noticed that you had hands in the chat. Just saying hi. Fair enough.
I was curious about the painting multiple times.
Yeah. It's horrendous.
And that will continue to be the case going forward?
No. So okay. I was lazy and I should have done like a slide about what this will look like in the future. But basically we will have 3 different fragments. So basically, layout objects today really only have 1 rectangle associated with them. But in NG's fragmentation engine, we can actually create a different sort of rectangle. We can create as many rectangles on an element as possible. And we call these, this is why we have a separate output layout structure called the fragment tree. So for example, this nested box in here will actually have 2 different fragments associated with it. And so that will be embedded in this like 2nd column fragment, and its 2nd fragment will be in this like 3rd column fragment. And so the painting structure, all works today. We can just say, hey, paint this fragment, and it'll just like go through and just paint that subtree. So we actually have like 1 class of failure is that for particularly long documents, we have pretty bad performance in terms of printing. I don't know if you've experienced, but you try and print and then we'll just hang for like 10 or 20 seconds. It's a really, really bad user experience. So we hope that we can basically, bring that in. So it's only a few seconds to actually, print a page type of thing. Part of it is, painting multiple times over and over. So if you imagine that, you lay out a 100-page document and then you're painting the same thing with a different clip. Part of it is that the fragmentation engine has really, really bad layout time performance as well. It's a combination of factors. Anything else? 5 minutes left. Okay. Then roughly, so likely, somewhat the start of next year, which is sort of scary to think that's only 6 or 9 months away. We sort of go into the delete all the things mode of the project. This sounds easy, but it'll actually be quite complicated to do. But basically, we'll be able to basically delete all the old legacy layout system. And we'll sort of need to do this in like 2 or 3 different steps. So the first part, we'll be able to delete a whole bunch of old layout code, which is just not reachable anymore because there's no way that we can fall back to the legacy system. So that will be a huge code reduction. There'll be lots of, staring at the code going, why did this exist? I'm not sure. What does it do? And the sort of final piece of this is that so currently we go from we sort of perform a layout on the fragment tree, and then currently we copy all the information that we did back into the layout object tree. And so the final part of that is basically stopping that copy back. This sounds expensive. It's really not that expensive. It accounts for probably like 3 or 4% of layout time. And we don't perform this copy back for inline related data structure. Inline data structures already read from the ng inline data structures. But that will sort of be like the final piece in the project type of thing. And that will be very, very complicated as well. But we should have a really, really nice layout system to work with sort of going forward. And we'll be able to do a lot of really, really advanced layout things that we weren't just able to do previously on the old layout system. So that's it. Any questions in the remaining 3 minutes, I guess?
What's the current status of Subgrid?
What's the current status of what, sorry?
Subgrid?
Subgrid, yeah. So I think Kurt might be better to answer this in the chat. But basically, I believe that the plan will be to work on Subgrid soon after grid ships, which will likely be in the next, release or 2. Kurt, did you want to add anything more there?
Yeah, that pretty much covers it. We have GridNG is a prerequisite for it. So a lot of the stuff that we built there is going to help make Subgrid a lot easier. And so I don't have the specific timeline just because we're finishing up GridNG, but Subgrid is next on our list of things to do after that.
Yeah, and this is all being driven by the Microsoft folks. One reason that we know that it's frustrating for web developers that people aren't getting Subgrid now. But one thing that we really want to make sure is that Grid was on a really solid foundation for Subgrid. Currently, Grid has some really, really bad performance problems. Actually, in like all layout engines. So I can craft HTML pages which only have like 10 to 20 elements in them, but it'll take like a minute to lay out type of thing. And sort of now with like our new system, and this is like we get all like this is a constant source of pain for us. We get like a bug report every month about our performance here. And sort of now we can lay out these pages in like 20 milliseconds. So that's sort of like we want to make sure that Grid is on a really solid foundation work, and then we'll get to Subgrid pretty soon. Cool. Thanks for the question, Eric. Anything else? Cool. Fantastic. I've got like another few slides if people want to know how that layout caching works, but I don't think that we'll be able to squeeze it in. But I might, if you're in the BlinkOn Slack, I can sort of give an overview of how that works to a smaller group of people if people are interested. Cool. With that, thank you, everyone, and we'll leave it at that.